welcome to the EduSat network. Today's lecture is on contemporary literature and what we also say 21st century literature. For this discussion, we have with us in the studio Professor Bhim Singh Dahiya, former Vice Chancellor at Kurukshetra University and also a very renowned academician. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Well, last time we did the postmodern literature, mostly later 20th century writing in English. Now we move further into the 21st. Of course, in literature as well as in life, changes are not sharp breaks with the past. It is just like evolution. Things evolve, the past runs into the present and present runs into future. So that's how things go. So when we say from modernism to postmodernism and from postmodernism to post-postmodernism, we do not mean that altogether new literature has come about. Certain trends continue to be there and certain new things creep in. That is how literature has always evolved itself. Just quickly, we can look back when Renaissance literature came in the 15th, 16th century. It was not a complete break with the medieval period. Certain tendencies of the medieval period still continued during the Renaissance. Similarly, I see after the Renaissance, when we came to the Neoclassical period of the 17th, 18th centuries, there again it was not a complete break with the Renaissance. But there was a change of emphasis from the romantic to the rules, to the classical norms, to the genres, rather than free expression and so on. Similarly, when we came to the early 19th century, romantic period, again there was a reaction against the neoclassical, but at the same time not a complete overthrow of that model or models, and so on and so forth. Similarly, from modernism to postmodernism, there were some continuities, but there was also a change. Now when we talk of contemporary literature, which is partly or even largely a continuation of the postmodern, we will also look into the new things that are coming up. Well, one of the things that is happening today is that literature in English, we do not call English literature now. Rather, we prefer to call it literature in English, because it is not people in England who are writing literature in English. It is being written all over the world. Indians are writing, Africans are writing, Australians, Canadians, Americans. So the largest writing in the field of literature is being done in English, and most of it is coming from outside of England itself. So it is no longer English literature, it is now literature in English. So you have to be very inclusive now. The canon of English literature now stands exploded. It is no longer like say Chaucer, Spenser, Shakespeare, Milton and Wordsworth. That was the canon earlier. But now you have to include American writers, you have to include Australian writers, you have to include Indian writers like Rushdie, Vikram Seth and others. They are included in the histories of English literature. Even Oxford history, if you read, you will find these Indian writers included there. V.S. Naipaul, for example, from the Caribbean, again included. So many new writers are coming. It is in fact very difficult to keep track of all writing being done in English today. So this is one of the things we need to remember, that Canon has now been revised and is being revised. It is being expanded. This also comes about because of the process of democratization. You see, it is no longer the elite canon. It is no longer the literature of the elite class or the ruling classes. Now more and more, you see, people are asserting and asking for space in all fields of knowledge, including literature. That's why these days we speak of ethnic literatures. There is Jewish literature, there is African literature, there is also African American literature, Asian American literature, so on and so forth. Even Dalit literature, minorities literature, so all kinds now. So you have to be inclusive. You can't be exclusive now. Earlier it was exclusive canon of English writers. Now it has to be all inclusive. Otherwise people will raise voices, protests and so on. This comes about also because of the impact of theory. You see, after 1960s, particularly after 1980s, there has been a dominance of theory with capital T. It is no longer literary theory, this theory or that theory. It is just theory with capital T. And it is now a discipline by itself. It is multidisciplinary project of the humanities, including social sciences, including law, education, literature, psychology, sociology and all that. And you see, there is a sort of consolidated, combined, coordinated effort of all these disciplines to study some of the aspects of knowledge, life and so on. So one of the things that theory emphasized was decentering the center and focusing on the margins. So all those communities, all those people who were marginalized, who were living peripheral life, had no share in the ruling, in the dominant center. It may be literature, it may be politics, whatever. Everywhere they were on the margins. Even women. That is why a lot of emphasis now on women empowerment, women writings, because they were also marginalized. They were also repressed for centuries. So thanks to theory, that now the focus is on the margins, and that's why decentering of the center and margins now are reaching the center, they are surrounding the center. There is an interesting move in literature. For example, some of the earlier texts are being rewritten. Hamlet, for example. There is a play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, with that title, which is decentering Hamlet and bringing these peripheral characters into the center. Similarly, say King Lear, other plays, they are being rewritten. Even earlier epics, novels, they are being rewritten from this very viewpoint, decentering the elite and bringing the minor characters, ignored people, repressed, even on the basis of gender. So all that is happening today, and that is, as I said, because of the impact of theory. Besides this, there is now a merging of different disciplines of knowledge. Now boundaries are being removed. Boundaries are now collapsing. Take the case of history and literature. You see, earlier historiography was considered the concern of historians alone. If at all history entered literature, like the historical novel started by Walter Scott in the 19th century and continued thereafter, history was just merely a background, and no novelist would swear by the truth of incidents or characters included in his novels. Of course, history and literature have always been near allied, as Aristotle had said long ago, that literature combines both history and philosophy. History addresses particular truths, particular realities, whereas philosophy addresses general truths. Literature combines both because literature gives you particular stories of men and women, of joys and sorrows, but in a manner that the particular is raised to the level of the universal. It has universal appeal. That is why we have been reading literature from all over the world. We still read Homer, for example, or Sophocles, or the Roman writers like Seneca or Cicero, and so on. We read them because they have universal relevance, universal appeal, emotional as well as intellectual, both. So that was the relationship between history and literature in a general way. But now those boundaries are removed. For example, if you read Amitav Ghosh, our Indian novelist, the kind of research into historical events that he is making, most historians have not done that. Sea of Poppies, for example, the trade, opium trade during the colonial period when the British ruled India. How between India and China it was taking place, the smuggling and other, underhand means, etc. He took several years to do research, going through records, going through histories, going through facts, even traveling and so on and so forth. So now the literary writers, novelists in particular, they have turned to history in a big way. In England, for example, there is a woman writer who has done a whole series on the Tudors, Tudor kings, these Henrys, and all fiction. So historical fiction today is very important. Dalrymple, for example, has done several books on the Mughals. That again is historical fiction. He doesn't swear by the truth of history, but at the same time he stays very close to history, and they do a lot of research. So that, you see, demarcation between history and literature and historiography and fictionalizing, that has been removed. So there is merging of boundaries now, a removal of boundaries, and similarly psychology. There are books in literature now, a lot of novels, where it is not merely an application of Freud, Jung or Lacan, but similar kind of probings of human experience, human mind on their own, and they are competing with the regular psychologists, just as they are competing with the historians. So now those boundaries no longer exist, and literature has expanded into the sister areas of social sciences and the humanities in general. This again has come from theory, because theory opened up to social sciences. Earlier, from Aristotle onward, through say other writers, Sidney and Shelley and Matthew Arnold, T.S. Eliot, we had literary theory and its own tradition. But then after theory, social sciences have come in a big way, and literature has become one of the social sciences. So you are studying now through the literary texts. You are talking of politics, you are talking of ideology, you are talking of historiography, you are talking of psychology, anthropology. By the way, Amitav Ghosh is an anthropologist by profession and very well qualified, and he uses his knowledge to create literary fictions. So similarly, other writers, highly qualified, Saul Bellow, for example, in America, a very well qualified person, a professor at Chicago University, writing. Most writers today are intellectuals in their own rights. They are not just storytellers. They are intellectuals in their respective fields, and they are making use of that knowledge of history or anthropology or psychology towards making fiction. Science fiction, for example, has come in a big way. This again started in the 19th century, you know, with Mary Shelley writing that Frankenstein, and later on H.G. Wells writing The Time Machine, etc. But then now it is a genre by itself, in its own right, and a lot of writers on both sides, in Europe as well as in Asia, in America, they are writing science fiction, so much so that it has now traveled into the vernacular languages, Indian languages, for example, as you are studying. There is science fiction in the local languages too, not merely in English. So now field is opening up. This again is a phenomenon of recent times, our times, post-modern, let us say, the contemporary 21st century literature. Now another thing that is happening is with language. You see, earlier there was such a thing as literary language, particular diction, particular say way of writing style. So both diction and style, they had to be in the literary mold, and it had to be distinct from other uses like use in social sciences. But now that distinction is also gone, is no longer there, because all kinds of language now is being used in literature. You read Rushdie, Salman Rushdie, for example, or Vikram Seth, for that matter, and the American writers like Kurt Vonnegut Jr., even Norman Mailer. So you will find them using the language of journalism, language of science, language of social sciences. So it is no longer literary as such. So it has now got mixed up with other registers of the language. Earlier it had its distinct, separate register, style of writing, but now see, all stand amalgamated into one language, which is a blanket language for all disciplines. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. And as I was listening to you, I thought of discussing a few things with you. Say, you were talking about merging of disciplines. Say, literature is not just about narrating a story or talking about what one self is, but also including disciplines such as history. You were giving examples. Then nowadays, a lot of popular literature bestsellers are coming out, which merge psychology with fiction, or even facts drawn from their own life. Say there's a clinical psychologist, Brian Weiss, and he writes novels with there's a spiritual angle, and he also makes use of his own knowledge of science, and he also puts in fiction into it.
Well, again, as you say, there is a mixing of biography in particular. Earlier, biography was a separate genre, biography, autobiography, and we used to look for separate self biographies. But now, biography and narrative, fictional narrative, and historical narrative, they are mixed up. You read, for example, Vikram Seth. He is writing about his own family, himself, his uncle and aunt, and so on, and at the same time making a story, fictional narrative. Salman Rushdie, for example, Midnight's Children, writing about his own birth, how he was born on the night of 1947, the partition, and then how his life developed along with the life of the nation. So it is not just biography, it is, as you say, politics also. These days you find, writers do not shy away from bringing in contemporary politics.
Yes.
Rushdie brings in politics. Similarly, Amitav Ghosh brings in politics. Khushwant Singh, of course, brings in politics. A lot of other writers, Norman Mailer, writing about American politics, American presidents, so on and so forth. Then you see Caryl Churchill. She is latest dramatist in England, writes feminist and satirical plays. And the last I read was a satire on these two presidents. No, Prime Minister of America and President of President of America and
Yes.
Prime Minister of England.
England, yes.
Bush and who was the other one? Major in England.
Right, sir.
Yeah, they were contemporaries. So she writes a satire on both, making them gay and so on. So it's very interesting. So politics again in a big way. In 1947, you find so many novels written on this historical event, but at the same time from the viewpoint of the politics also, politics of the partition and post-partition. Now Chetan Bhagat is writing about himself and about contemporary problems, psychological, spiritual and so on. So things are now amalgamated, and the readers also have to be very aware.
Yes.
You can't just be reading for an interesting story. Now it is not just an interesting story, there is too much of knowledge, and it is because of the influence of media, for example. You have television, 24-hour channels going on, and too many researches in every field, too many books. You see, we think now people don't read books because there is TV and other, you see, electronic media. But the fact is, the other day I was reading statistics. Largest number of books are being published today,
Right.
and every year the number increases. So the world is changing very fast, and so are books, and so is literature. And literature now is assimilating, knowledge from all around, from sciences, from social sciences, from spiritual, religious writing. All has gone into it, and it's a very strange sort of amalgamation. And reader has also to be very aware. So if you don't know all this, you will not really enjoy. You will not even follow the storyline. You will follow it only when you have all this awareness of the contemporary world.
Right. Sir, as I was also thinking that in contemporary literature, every writer feels free, as you were mentioning the the term amalgamation. So every writer feels very free to not just stick to a particular category or think that I cannot refer to this idea or that subject. They are continually even moving from one topic to another, what concerns them specifically. So we don't see a typical style that say in the 10 years only this style has been followed. Say Amitav Ghosh is following a different writing technique, then Rushdie is following his own. Then you mentioned Chetan Bhagat, who's adopting a different writing style. So is it also a part of the idea of decentering that you were mentioning? That
exactly.
No longer sticking to the margins.
Yeah, the earlier classical forms and genres like epic, tragedy, comedy, novel, satire, now those forms stand exploded. Just as there is explosion of knowledge in the 20th century and more so in the 21st. Similarly, there is an explosion of forms also, and no longer the limited set number of literary forms hold good today. And forms are not merely exploded, they got mixed up also. So it is not just formlessness, it is creating new forms and a lot of innovations, experimentation is going on in literary writing. It all started with the Modernist movement. Modernist movement in the early 20th century was an attempt at experimentation in the use of language, style and structure, form, like the Wasteland, for example. It doesn't have the organic form. Earlier 19th century romantics and so on, they always believed in the organic form, that just like the tree grows, you remember Keats saying, if poetry comes not like leaves to a tree, it better not come at all. So it has to be a spontaneous growth like the tree or like a human organism. So parts linked up with each other. Aristotle had given this analogy of the organism long ago, that all parts are to be fitted into each other to make a whole. So unless parts are related to the whole, it is not an organic form.
Right.
But no longer now any organism. They don't believe in organic form. Now the earlier people will call it formless, but it is not formlessness, it is new forms and new technology coming now. Now you see, with mobile, with electronic media, you are connected all over. So similarly in the narrative, you find you see space now, those distances removed. So no longer time and space are linear. Earlier they were linear in literary forms.
Right.
But now there is simultaneity of time as well as space. In the same time, you can be here as well as elsewhere. You can talk to people in America or anywhere. Now people are going to the moon. So the whole concept has changed. And now you are not merely writing about earthlings. Now there is a cosmic vision. It is no longer confined to societies, communities, nations living on earth. Now the whole global scenario has, you see, gathered dimensions of the cosmic vision, and therefore it has affected literary narratives also. But there also, particularly in science fiction, you have all these planetary, you see, connections, and you are not just writing about people living on earth.
Yes.
You are writing about the whole cosmos.
Yes, representative of the whole world.
Whole world.
Yes.
Universe.
So, could we then say that this freedom that the writers exercise now has been granted to them from earlier generations, say the modernists that began with the experimentation with new forms?
Yeah, as you say, it is not just the freedom about form or style or historiography. It is total freedom. Earlier, it was not very safe for any writer to write about many things.
Right.
Politics, for example. In Shakespeare's time, if you write anything against the monarch or the system a monarchy, then your nose or ears, they'll be chopped off, or you will be thrown into prison. Even later, you know what happened to so many writers, even Oscar Wilde in the later 19th century, because he was accused to be gay and thrown into prison, so on and so forth, exiled, all kinds of things.
Yes.
But today the writer has total freedom. Earlier, politics was one of the subjects writers would fear and would hesitate to write about. But now no writer is intimidated by any politics. You find Salman Rushdie writing about even Nehru family, writing against them, mentioning them by name.
Yes.
So much so that in the land beneath our feet
Yes.
has a dog named Nehru. Imagine. Although it is in bad taste, I would not call it literature.
Yes.
You are settling your personal scores. That doesn't make it literature. But now biography, history, fiction, science, all are amalgamated, and the writer now is free not merely in mixing forms, but in talking about anything. So no subject is now prohibited for the writer.
Right.
He can write about any subject and can mix up subjects also, like this politics is mixed up with history, mixed
yes.
up with any personal story,
Yes.
your own biography.
Yes. So now we could even we even have literature which may not have a storyline, but it has elements of politics, history, psychology. Even that qualifies
Yes.
as literature.
Yeah. The kind of things you have in life, culture, like mixing up things,
Yes.
making new and newer combinations of things. You have in films also. 2, 3 old films mixed up.
Mixed up. Yes.
You have in fashion patchwork. So there is lot of patchwork in literature also.
Literature also.
They combine several things and make tapestries of their own. So it is no longer organic. And similarly, they mix up genres, they mix up earlier books, they write, you know, several films now remake.
Remakes, yes.
So the process of remaking also is there in literature of our time, where old things are, even Ramayana rewritten, or Mahabharata rewritten, R.K. Narayan, narrated the 3 epics, rewrote them in his own. So that is going on, remaking, remixing, patchwork, etc., etc. These are new things in the new century, and literature, culture, all keep pace with each other. After all, literature is also a product of culture. Theory said that. Earlier literature was thought to be something esoteric. Somebody has a vision, somebody has a dream, somebody is exceptional genius, so on and so forth. But now they say no, it is just like any other cultural product, like film, like magazine, like other arts, painting and so on, or even making a good design on a cloth, a piece of cloth. All this is cultural. So they say literature has nothing special about it. There is no genius involved, and it can be made. So it is considered a product. That's why a new vocabulary in literary criticism, they call it construction. Your identity is constructed.
Okay.
Your literary narratives are constructed. Your culture is constructed. Foucault, for example, in his History of Sexuality, he says that what we today call a woman, what is a woman, what is a man, he says it is 19th century construction. The 19th century discourse of church, of education, of customs and ceremonies, you see, they define what a woman should be, just as our customs, you see, do. So he says this is all constructed, it is not natural, it is not universal either. So every culture constructs its own views of what is man, what is woman.
What is woman?
This is not God given, this is not nature given. But we were told earlier that this is nature given or God given. But now they say no. So this is, that reminds me of a very important phenomenon of our time, both in culture and literature, that is demystification. They have demystified all the earlier myths, rituals, the stories about gods and goddesses. Now they say these are cultural constructions, man-made. There is nothing supernatural about them. So there is demystification of the earlier myths, which is a great thing again. It's a liberation from the past. It's a liberation from the tyranny of our customs, rituals, etc.
Right. Okay. Sir, would you agree that when the writers had entered into the new millennium, say when the 21st century began, were they constantly at that time looking back to the past to look for models, although they had moved on and there was that emphasis on change? Were they trying also, did they try to find that greater imaginative stimulus in the previous century?
Certainly, yeah. That's why, as I said in the very beginning, there are no sharp breaks when, say, forms or content or ideology changes in literature. Although theory, of course, has emphasized that there are no continuities, there are discontinuities, there are dislocations, and there are gaps, silences. That's why these days you find in literary criticism a study of these things. Rather than what does a poem speak, they will go into what it does not speak, what it leaves out,
Right.
like it leaves out margins, it leaves out so many things. That has happened. But I would say that there are both.
Yes.
You
Continuities
can't
and,
say that there is no continuity. Life as well as literature has always had continuity, as well as dislocations too, of course. Discontinuities, they also come. That's how life goes. Action and reaction, equal and opposite. So there are reactions, there are actions. But then, as T.S. Eliot says, you remember that essay, Tradition and Individual Talent.
Okay.
He says every 100 years or so, there comes a great talent who alters the taste of generations. So that's why great movements have come about. Great writers have brought about changes. That's why you have Renaissance literature or Romantic literature, so on and so forth. You had great epic writers. Wordsworth came, he changed the scenario from the Neoclassical to the Romantic. He gave his own theory, spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Then came the Victorians. Matthew Arnold gave his own. So he gave a turn to the movement. So turning points come every now and then. But as Eliot says, these turning points ultimately get assimilated into tradition.
Right.
All of them put together constitutes the tradition. So right from Homer to the present, there is a link
Yes.
at every stage, at every point, at every turning. Turning and turning, you remember in Yeats.
Turning of
Gyre,
the gyres,
yeah.
yes.
And then turning in Eliot also. So there are these turns and twists in history of literature as well as any other discipline of knowledge, but at the same time there is always a larger compass
Yes.
which can always accommodate contradictions, which can accommodate reactions, and at the same time it keeps on going, continuity. So that is what Eliot calls tradition.
Tradition, yes.
So there is a relationship between the individual talent who stands in his own right, but at the same time gets assimilated finally into a larger tradition.
Right. So we can also say that these writers, apart from their urge to focus on specific issues that concern them, they were also writing to cater to a certain audience, to draw their interest and increase the readership.
Sure. Yeah, that is a very important point because ultimately literature has to be local. You have so many languages. David Crystal, the leading linguist in the world today, he says there are over 6,000 languages. Obviously, all of these languages have their literatures, and each writer has in mind the target audience for whom he is writing.
Writing, yes.
Hindi writer will have his audience or his clientele, so on and so forth, English, French, German, etc., etc. You see, in 1957 there had come a book called Anatomy of Criticism by Northrop Frye, and in his introduction, which he calls polemical introduction, there he says that every literature is essentially regional. It caters to a particular region, a particular community of people. Later it may have wider, like English of course has spread out and that it has become world language. But imagine 14th century England, language at that time, it was limited to a small people. But then came the empire,
Yes.
spread. And after empire came this technology, TV and all, electronic media. So it became world language.
World language.
Because unless you know English, you don't know computer
Yes.
and computer language. So that's how the world changes. But it has both sides to it. The better side is that it brings about some homogeneity, breaking of barriers of nationalism, race, ethnicity, and so on. But at the same time, as David Crystal points out, it sounds a death knell to many languages also. He says out of these 6,000 and odd languages, half the languages are dying. And he says by the end of the century, which he means 20th century, which is already over, he says half of them will die, and which he calculates, he says on the average, every 2 weeks a language is dying. There are no speakers left.
Yes.
just as now everybody wants to learn English. In India, see, wherever I go, from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, I find hoardings in every street. Learn American English, learn British English, small coaching centers, and even in schools from nursery, from pre-nursery English.
They start
So
studying.
obviously, when too much emphasis comes on English, other Indian languages suffer. You see, kids today would not know what we call mother language,
Yes,
which is their mother language.
mother language.
You see, your parents, middle class, they speak English at home so that children start speaking English. So they don't speak Haryanvi or UP or Kashmiri. So where is the mother tongue?
Yes,
Their mother tongue is English.
yes,
So there are both sides to English. Good side is homogenization, breaking of barriers. At the same time, you see, bad news for local languages. You see, the poor things they lose, and then market.
yes,
Now English has a global market.
global market.
So every writer attempts writing in English because you will have the largest market. You will sell, you will make
Yes,
money.
you will make money.
In small languages, how much can you really earn? In Hindi, they tell me they have to pay for getting their books published.
Oh,
But Rusty will make billions.
billions.
One book, say Booker Prize, that makes you a millionaire.
Yes,
Just one book, Arundhati Roy or Kiran Desai. Kiran Desai got contract even before she had written the next book, contract from a publisher
Right.
for millions of pounds.
right.
So that is the
Sir,
aspect.
sorry to interrupt you, but we have a caller from Srinagar who wants.
Oh, sure.
So we know that literature includes social sciences like history, psychology, etc. Does it mean that we can say that the definition of literature changes? As I know, literature and sciences are totally different.
Well, of course, literature will remain literature. It assimilates, it incorporates, it extends its area of narratives, but at the same time, its final emphasis will be literary. I was reading Tagore this morning, and he says literature will have history, and history can have literature. But then he says what literature can do, history cannot. So literature's final emphasis is humanizing. No other discipline of knowledge, it may be sciences or social sciences, aim at that. Literature works through emotions, through sentiments, and it influences you. Other knowledges, they just appeal to your mind. Literature appeals to your whole being, your personality. Therefore, even when literary narratives are becoming inclusive and crossing boundaries, does not mean that they cease to be literature. They will always remain, otherwise they have no relevance. Their relevance lies in staying literary.
Yes. Okay. I hope your question was answered, and thank you so much for sending us your question. So, continuing with the discussion, sir, as we were talking about literature that caters to popular demand. So, we have literature being produced such as the Harry Potter series, which became extremely popular. It's still so popular. And writers like Chetan Bhagat, on whose novels are movies are being made, films are being made. So, would this category, would it still be considered low or not so serious literature, or we could also consider them in the canon, which is continually being revised?
Now, in fact, this also has been a part of theory's crusade against Canon. Earlier there was a sharp distinction between the canon and popular literature. So popular literature or popular culture also, pop
Yes,
culture
pop
and
culture.
so on, that was considered secondary, and it was never given the rightful place or pride of place in literature teaching, for example. We never included the popular writers like Somerset Maugham, most popular, or Sherlock Holmes, but we don't teach them.
Yes.
We'll teach Milton, Shakespeare, so on and so forth, highbrow literature. But these days, that barrier is also broken, and popular literature, popular culture has become a part of the mainstream. In fact, that is dominating today in films, in literature, in magazines, everywhere. So that distinction no longer holds good.
Holds good.
Yeah.
Sir, although a lot of readers do profess ideas, say, oh no, I will not read this. This is not very highbrow literature. But I think then it becomes a very individual position instead of being a generalized assumption.
That is very personal and individual. Every individual will have his her own taste, and you have a right to do that. I may not read Chetan Bhagat, but there are a lot of people who are crazy about it.
Yes.
I may be crazy about Shakespeare alone. So that is personal. But then this brings in another important point. You see, as I said, endorsing Northrop Frye, that literature is essentially local. But at the same time, the way world is becoming more and more globalized, there is the role of translation, where everybody aims at the world market or world readership, and therefore would like to be translated in a language which can make him or her available to other readers.
Right.
That's why now every vernacular writer in Hindi, Kannada or Tamil, whatever, they aspire to be translated into English. And a lot of them are being translated.
Yes.
So translation has become now very important area of study.
Right. Okay. I'm sure that the listeners greatly benefited from this lecture, and they would be able to watch this on YouTube as well. And in this lecture, we saw that in the contemporary literature, also a lot of continuities from the earlier generation, but also there is emphasis on change. We saw that theory is now with a capital T, and decentering happening because of theory. There is a merging of disciplines of knowledge, boundaries are collapsing, say now we can include history, philosophy, literature all together in a text, writing becoming more interdisciplinary. So thank you so much for watching, and stay tuned in, and have a nice day. Thank you.